everyone, and welcome to Human Stories. My name is Erin Routon. I recently received my PhD in anthropology from Cornell University, and I'm currently working with Harvard University's writing program, where I'm teaching classes on immigration and incarceration. So what I'm going to be talking about today is my doctoral research in facilities in the US known as family detention centers. As an anthropologist, I conducted ethnographic research in these centers with a group of volunteer legal advocates that provide pro bono legal support to the detained asylum seekers incarcerated there. For my research, I observed and participated in the legal work done by these advocates in 2 facilities in South Texas from 2015 to 2018. And I conducted over 150 interviews with these advocates about their experiences. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what these facilities are, the findings of my research with legal advocates, and what this research can possibly tell us about people and immigration policy and practices. I'd like to start with a little background on these facilities to contextualize what we're talking about here and the history that's led to where we are now. While family detention stories started decades ago, I'm going to start in 2014 with the most recent and expansive instantiation of family detention. First and foremost, though, what is family detention? Family detention refers to a specific form of immigrant incarceration, and it's typically characterized by these qualities. Temporary incarceration of an asylum-seeking parent, historically a female parent, with their child or children of minor age. They're incarcerated while they undergo an initial part of the asylum legal process known as the credible or reasonable fear interview. This interview is conducted by an asylum officer, a representative of USCIS, or the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This person will determine in the interview if the applicant has a credible or reasonable claim for asylum, and then determine whether that person can continue the lengthy process of a legal case. If so, detainees are released from the family detention center into the U.S., and if not, they are deported directly from the center. So what started this? In 2014, there was a large influx of immigrant mothers and children specifically arriving at the Mexico-US border. Nearly all were from Central America, mostly from the countries known as the Northern Triangle countries of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. They were requesting asylum at the border, meaning that they were fleeing from some form of harm or persecution in their home countries that they were incapable of receiving protection from and could not apply for refugee legal status before fleeing their homes. Many share similar stories of why they fled, mostly from gang violence, intimate partner violence, and the failure of the state in which they lived to protect them. Now, because of the amount in the tens of thousands, the Obama administration deemed this a crisis and allowed for the construction of special facilities in which to detain these people so that they argued their claims could be vetted before allowing them to continue with the legal process. So this is where I did my research, called family detention centers, or as the government calls them, residential centers. Up until early this year, there were just 3 of these centers in the US. The South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, Texas, the Karnes County Residential Center in Karnes City, Texas, and the Berks County Residential Center in Pennsylvania. The South Texas Center has been the largest immigrant detention center in the US, holding up to 2,400 prisoners. These 2 centers here are privately owned and managed by the 2 largest private prison corporations in the US, GEO Group and CoreCivic. So what the government does is they contract with these private entities to run and profit off of these facilities. One difference between immigrant and non-immigrant prisoners is that in the US, immigrant prisoners are by law not guaranteed legal representation or assistance with their cases. Not only are they not guaranteed assistance, but asylum law is extremely complex and difficult to navigate on one's own. Evidence shows that asylum seekers who have legal assistance with their cases are incomparably more likely to win those cases than those who don't have assistance. Without this, a lot of traumatized, vulnerable asylum seekers are looking for shelter from the harm they're fleeing, the purpose of asylum law, and don't have effective access to it. Thus, there are these groups of people who are either immigration lawyers or are knowledgeable about immigration or asylum law and they offer free, or what they call pro bono, services to immigrants seeking asylum. So I did my research with a couple of groups like this who offer their services specifically to the parents and children detained in these family detention centers. So these were groups made of paid staff, working for nonprofit organizations, and masses of volunteers who offer their time and services on a rotational basis. Though they're there to provide legal services, they basically do everything and anything that they can to help these detainees. They help them prepare their cases, inform them of their legal rights as asylum seekers. They find translators, often volunteers themselves, in their own languages to translate necessary information. And they also help them to get proper medical treatments, which they're often denied. Now, these groups are not providing these services on behalf of the government, and they are not paid or supported by administrators of these facilities. They believe that migrants, especially migrant families, don't need to be and absolutely shouldn't be incarcerated in these centers. These centers, they argue, do harm to these families as they separate family members from one another, don't provide necessary health or legal resources, and generally serve to punish migrants for taking part in what is their legal right to seek asylum. And most of my evidence and scholarly evidence and my own research supports these claims. So what are my main findings? First, what I looked at in my research were three things: contested narratives and practices of care. These facilities and the language around them strongly identify with care and doing good, helping migrants and protecting them rather than punishing them. Administrators of these centers strongly denied that these are prisons or are prison-like, arguing that they are there to keep families safe while they undergo the asylum interview. Legal advocates, of course, strongly disagree, arguing that these centers are depriving detained families of care and are causing active and unnecessary trauma. So I was looking at that gap in interpretation of care, looking at how legal advocates are actually caregivers themselves. Next, I was looking at the emotional qualities of this prison environment and the kinds of interactions they were having. So I considered the emotional aspects of this work that they were doing and the effect it had on both the relationships advocates developed with detained persons and the effect it had on them personally, especially after they left this work and reflected on their experiences. And then lastly, I was critically reflecting on the humanitarian action of these groups. What was their work accomplishing? Was it helpful? Was it harmful? Because as scholarly research shows, humanitarian work has the potential to cause more problems than it resolves, sometimes in collaborating with entities like local governments that harm communities, and other times in stripping individuals or groups of their own agency. My findings, like these facilities, and like much of ethnographic research, are complicated. But here are a few of my main findings. So one, legal advocates are working in these spaces as caregivers. And describing what they do simply as legal aid doesn't really encompass all that they do. This includes the fact that their work involves a lot of emotional labor, as the work that they do with detainees is very stressful and emotional. But the everyday interactions they have with people like guards and asylum officers is also very difficult, stressful, and emotional, as they're often working at counter purposes and thus have inherently strained relationships. So I choose to describe what they do as legal care. Connected to that, that care is something that is fought over in spaces like this is also important. What constitutes care and what constitutes harm is defined and redefined by different actors, from advocates to guards to asylum officers. I observe that care is something that's contested in spaces like these, and that it can be used through language and practice to disguise harmful realities. Then lastly, my work shows that detention is harmful and traumatic for asylum-seeking families, and legal advocates are struggling daily with both government and facility officials, as well as unfair legal processes to alleviate that. So what can this tell us about people today? To start, it's important to note that these facilities in Texas are currently in another transition from family detention or residential centers to what they're calling reception centers, wherein detainees would be temporarily held while travel to their new homes would be arranged and they are tested for COVID-19. This is only the most recent change in what has been a whirlwind of changes in the past several years to immigration and asylum policy and practices. Despite these changes, though, I believe there are things that this research tells us about people, narratives, and labor that will prove to be helpful and useful in examining immigration in the future. One, incarcerated immigrants, especially asylum seekers, need legal support. Asylum law is far too complicated and support is unnecessarily inaccessible to them. The fact that asylum seekers are typically in the middle of a trauma event while undergoing these processes as they've fled their homes and homelands further inhibits their ability to undergo these processes without significant support. Next, evidence strongly supports the argument that incarceration of asylum-seeking families is unnecessary and compounds trauma. This is important as different presidential administrations continue to lean upon incarceration as a strategy in responding to immigrants. Migrant parents and children are being left with lasting trauma as a result of this form of policy and practical response. And as many scholars and activists have pointed out, it does not serve to protect either local communities or migrants themselves. And finally, we can and should think more expansively about who provides care and who does not. One thing scholars of care have repeatedly pointed out is that recognizing different forms of care labor as valuable is important, because often what care workers are doing in many different forms is crucial to daily life and the functioning of society. Lawyers, legal assistants, translators, volunteers, all of these people are providing care to migrants, and it's important to value their work as care work. This really extends far beyond legal advocates and family detention because there are so many individuals that are engaged in the legal support of detained migrants in this country and in others. So we're at the end of the presentation now, and I'd like to thank you all for listening and watching. I'd first like to acknowledge the University of Toronto for inviting me to participate in the Human Story series. And I'd also like to thank, of course, the legal advocacy communities who allow me to work with them and conduct research with them, as well as the detained migrants who allowed me to support them as a legal advocate myself. And lastly, please check out the Human Stories blog and consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you.